My name is Wade Colburn, and I need to tell you what happened to my town. I grew up in Harlow, Illinois, southern part of the state, down where the land flattens out into river-bottom fields between low wooded ridges. Population was about 1,600 people, small enough that everyone knew each other, big enough to have its own fire department, its own grain elevator, its own gas station and dollar store, and 3 churches. The kind of place where you wave at every truck that passes you on the road because you probably know who is driving it. I was an electrician by trade, took over my father's business when he retired. I also volunteered with the fire department, had been on the roster since I was 21. In a town like Harlow, being a volunteer firefighter does not mean you sit around a station waiting for calls. It means you have a pager clipped to your belt and a set of turnout gear behind the seat of your truck. And when the tone goes off, you leave whatever you are doing and you respond. I have responded to car wrecks on the county road, field fires in August when the beans get dry, propane leaks, a grain bin rescue once that I still have nightmares about. I know what emergencies feel like. I know the way your hands get steady and your thinking gets clear when training takes over. I am telling you this so you understand that I am not a person who panics. When something goes wrong, I am one of the people who shows up to fix it. That is what makes this so hard to tell, because the night the sirens went off, I showed up and there was nothing I could do. There was nothing anyone could have done. Harlow had 2 tornado sirens, old mechanical units installed in the 1970s. They were mounted on tall steel poles at the north and south ends of Main Street. Big yellow horns on top, electric motor inside that spun a rotor to produce that classic rising and falling wail. They were tested on the first Tuesday of every month at 10 in the morning. If you grew up in Harlow, that sound was part of your life the same way church bells were. You heard it and you knew what it meant. Tornado warning, get inside, get low, wait for the all clear. It was a system, and it worked, and everybody trusted it. The night it happened was a Tuesday in late September, not the first Tuesday. No tests were scheduled. I had checked the weather that afternoon because I had an outdoor job the next morning, running conduit on a new pole barn south of town. The forecast was clean. Clear skies, low humidity, temperatures dropping into the mid-40s overnight. No fronts, no watches, no warnings, no advisories. Nothing. It was going to be one of those cool, quiet autumn nights that make you remember why you live in the Midwest. I was in my living room around 9:15, half watching a football game on television. My wife, Donna, had gone to bed early. She worked mornings at the county clerk's office and was usually out by 8:30. The house was quiet. The windows were cracked to let the cool air in. I could hear crickets. I could hear the occasional car on the county road a quarter mile east. Then the sirens went off, both of them, north and south. That long rising wail climbing up through the night air and filling every corner of the town. My first reaction was automatic. I muted the television and listened, confirmed it was both sirens, not just one, pulled my phone out and opened the weather radar. Nothing. Clear returns everywhere. No rotation, no cells, no warnings from the National Weather Service. I checked 3 different apps. All of them showed the same thing. Empty skies for 200 miles in every direction. I figured it was a malfunction. It had happened once before, maybe 8 years back, when a power surge tripped the activation relay. I grabbed my jacket and my truck keys and walked to the bedroom door. I told Donna the sirens had gone off and I was heading to the station to shut them down. She said something I could not make out, half asleep, and I left. Outside, the night was exactly what the forecast had promised. Stars everywhere, more stars than you see most nights, because the humidity was so low. Cool air that smelled like cut hay and dry leaves. No wind at all. The trees along the street were completely still, and over all of it, those sirens. Without a storm to compete with, without thunder and wind and rain, the sirens were louder than I had ever heard them. The sound filled the air like something solid. I could feel it vibrating in my back teeth. I drove toward the fire station on Main Street. A few houses had lights coming on, porch lights, bedroom windows, people doing what they were supposed to do, checking their phones, looking at the sky, trying to figure out why the sirens were going on a clear night. I saw a couple of people on their porches in bathrobes. I waved. They waved back. Everything still felt normal. A nuisance, not an emergency. Then the sirens changed. I need to explain something about those sirens so you understand why this matters. They were mechanical. One moving part. An electric motor spun a rotor inside a cast aluminum horn, and the rotation of the rotor chopped the air to produce that wail. The pitch was fixed by the speed of the motor and the design of the rotor. The sirens made one sound. They had always made one sound. There were no settings, no variable tones, no way to change what came out of them without physically rebuilding the mechanism. What came out of them changed. The wail dropped in pitch, not the way a siren drops when it is winding down, that slow deflating sound you hear when someone kills the power. This was different. The pitch dropped lower than those sirens could produce, lower than any siren that size should be able to go. It became deep and thick, and it slowed down until it was not a wail anymore, but a single sustained tone that pulsed and wavered like something breathing through the horns. It sounded wet. That is the only word I have for it. The sound had a quality to it like a voice pushed through a throat full of fluid. There was something behind it that was not mechanical. Something that sounded like intent, like the sirens were not making a noise, but being used to make a noise. The way you would press your mouth to a length of pipe and force sound through it. Except whatever was using the sirens as its mouth was not anything with lips or lungs. I pulled over on the side of the road 2 blocks from the station and sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening. That sound filled Harlow. It came from the north siren and the south siren simultaneously, and it bounced off the buildings and the grain elevator and the water tower until it was everywhere, sourceless, directionless. Every dog in town started barking. I could hear them from every direction. That panicked, rapid bark that dogs do when something is wrong in a way they cannot identify. Dozens of dogs all going at once. Then they stopped. All of them. At the same time. Like a switch had been thrown. The barking cut off and left nothing but the sirens and their new terrible sound. I sat there in the silence where the dogs had been, and I felt the first real thread of fear move through me. Not the manageable kind of fear that comes with emergency response, Something older than that. Something from before training and procedure and the calm voice you learned to use on a scene. Something from the part of your brain that still remembers being prey. I drove to the station. The bay doors were open and the lights were on. 2 other volunteers had beaten me there. Pete Loomis, a big quiet guy who worked at the grain elevator, and Craig Dunlap, younger, maybe 26, taught shop class at the high school. Both of them were standing in the apparatus bay, next to the engine, and they looked wrong. Not hurt. Shaken. Pete had his arms crossed over his chest, and he was staring at the control panel on the wall near the dispatch desk. Craig was on his phone, holding it to his ear, not talking. Pete told me he had tried to shut the sirens off. The control panel was dead. I walked over and looked at it myself. He was right. The panel was completely dark. No indicator lights, no power, nothing. I opened the breaker box on the wall behind it. The breaker for the siren system was in the off position. I flipped it on. Nothing happened. I flipped it off and back on. Nothing. The panel stayed dead. And outside, the sirens kept going. I want you to sit with that for a second. The breaker was off. The control panel had no power, and the sirens were still running. I am an electrician. I have been working with wiring and circuits and motors my entire adult life. What I was looking at was not possible. A mechanical siren cannot run without electrical power any more than a light bulb can glow without current. But they were running. That sound was still pouring out of them. That low, wet, pulsing moan that did not belong to any machine. Craig told me he could not reach the county emergency management office. Not a busy signal, not voicemail. Dead air. He had tried 3 times. Pete had tried the station landline. Same thing. Dead air on every number. I pulled out my own phone and tried calling 911. The call connected, but there was nothing on the other end. No dispatcher, no recording, just silence with that siren sound bleeding faintly through it, as if the phone network itself was carrying the noise. I made a decision. I told Pete to stay at the station and keep trying to make contact. I told Craig to come with me. We were going to the north siren to disconnect it manually. It was a mechanical system. There was a junction box at the base of the pole with the main power feed. If I could physically cut the wires, the motor would have no power source and the siren would stop. Whatever was happening, removing the power supply had to kill it. That is how electricity works. There are no exceptions. We drove to the north end of Main Street. The siren was mounted on a pole behind the Lutheran church, near the edge of the residential area where the houses gave way to fields. When we turned onto the street, I took my foot off the gas and the truck slowed to a crawl. People were outside. Not a few people on their porches. Dozens of people, standing in their front yards, standing on the sidewalks, standing in the middle of the street. Men and women and children, some of them in pajamas, some of them barefoot, some of them in whatever they had been wearing when they came outside. And every single one of them was facing east, towards the open fields at the edge of town. They were not moving. They were not talking to each other. They were standing perfectly still with their arms at their sides, faces turned east, and the only sound was the sirens filling the air above them. I called out to a woman I recognized, Beth Hardin, who ran the diner on Main Street. She was standing in her yard in a bathrobe with her hair still in curlers. I said her name twice, loud enough that she should have heard me over the sirens. She did not turn around. She did not react at all. Craig grabbed my arm and pointed east, past the last houses, out toward the fields. I looked. The darkness out there was wrong. I do not know how else to say it. It was not the normal darkness of unlit farmland at night. It had substance, density. It sat on the horizon like a wall, clearly defined against the star field above it. A solid line of black that started at ground level and rose up maybe 60 or 70 feet into the air. It was not fog. Fog diffuses at the edges and moves with air currents. This was still and sharp-edged, and it was sitting there at the border of the fields like it was waiting. I made myself focus. Get to the junction box. Cut the power. Fix the thing you can fix. I parked near the base of the siren pole and got out with my tool bag. The junction box was a standard outdoor electrical panel, padlocked, mounted about 4 feet off the ground. I cut the lock with my bolt cutters and opened the box. Inside was the main feed line, running from the underground conduit up to the motor at the top of the pole. 2 wires, simple. I loosened the terminal connections and pulled the wires free, held one in each hand with 3 feet of dead air between them. The siren above my head did not stop. I stood there, holding 2 disconnected wires, and listened to the siren continue to produce that sound, that deep, wet moan, without any power source at all. The motor should have been dead. The rotor should have been still. There was no electricity flowing to that machine. I was holding the proof in my hands, and the sound kept coming, pouring out of the horn like something was breathing through it. Craig was still in the truck. When I got back in, he looked at me and said we need to leave. He was right. We drove back toward the station, and the streets of Harlow had gotten worse. More people were outside, all of them in the same state, standing, silent, facing east. I drove slowly down Main Street, and I could see them on every block, coming out of their houses and joining the others, moving with the same slow, purposeful walk, stopping in their yards or in the street and turning east and going still. I passed a young woman I did not recognize standing in the middle of her front lawn, holding an infant against her chest. The baby was silent. They were both facing east. Neither of them was moving. I pulled up beside Gus Elwood, a farmer in his 60s who lived near the south end of town. Gus and I had known each other my entire life. He had been friends with my father. I got out and walked up to him and put my hand on his shoulder and said his name. He was breathing. His eyes were open, but he did not respond to my voice or my touch. His skin was cold, not cool from the night air, cold, like the heat was draining out of him from the inside. I looked at his face, and his eyes were not right. His pupils were blown wide, so wide that his eyes looked almost entirely black. Just thin rings of color around 2 huge dark circles. And the black of his pupils had a quality to it I do not have the right words for. It did not look like the surface of an eye. It looked like depth, like I was not looking at his eye, but looking into something through his eye, something far away and dark and empty. I stepped back from him. I looked east. The wall of darkness had moved closer. It was at the edge of the fields now, maybe a 1/4 mile from the nearest houses. It had not been that close 5 minutes ago. We got back to the station. Pete was gone. The bay doors were still open, the lights still on, the engine still parked where it always was. But Pete was not inside. I checked the lot behind the building and found him standing next to the dumpster, facing east. Same posture, same stillness. When I got close enough to see his face, I saw the same black eyes. Craig was coming apart. He was talking fast, saying we should just drive, get on the county road going south, and not stop until we hit the interstate. I thought about it. I almost agreed. Then I thought about Donna. I drove home. My front door was standing open. The bedroom was empty, the covers thrown back, her slippers still on the floor beside the bed. I walked through the house calling her name. I found her in the backyard, standing in the grass near the garden shed. She was in her nightgown, barefoot in the cold, wet grass, facing east. When I got to her and looked at her face, I saw those same black eyes, that same terrible depth where her warm brown eyes should have been. I said her name. I touched her cheek. Her skin was so cold. She did not blink. She did not move. She was breathing, slow and shallow, and staring east at something I could not see. That was the moment I broke. Not the sirens, not the darkness, not Pete or Gus or the people in the streets. My wife standing barefoot in the cold grass with the holes where her eyes should have been. I sat down on the back steps and put my face in my hands, and I stayed there for a while. I'm not going to tell you I cried because I honestly do not remember. I think I went somewhere past crying, into that numb place where your body is just trying to keep functioning while your mind refuses to process what is in front of it. When I lifted my head, the darkness was closer. I could see it above the roof line of the house across the alley. It had reached the tree line at the edge of town, and the siren sound had changed again. Lower, slower, almost not a tone anymore, but a single drawn-out syllable, almost a word, almost something you could understand if you let yourself listen closely enough. I did not let myself listen closely enough. I went back to the truck. Craig was in the passenger seat. He looked at me and said he could hear something in the sirens, said it sounded like his name. His voice was flat and calm in a way that did not match the words. I told him not to listen. He nodded, but when I looked at his eyes in the glow of the dashboard, his pupils were wider than they should have been. Not fully gone like the others, but going. I drove south. I made the choice, and I made it fast because I knew if I thought about it, I would go back to Donna, and I would sit with her in the yard, and whatever happened to everyone else would happen to me too. I pointed the truck towards the county road that connects Harlow to the state highway, and I drove. When I reached the south edge of town, the road was blocked. Not by anything physical. No barricade, no fallen tree, no wreck. The darkness was there. It had come around from the east and stretched along the southern edge of Harlow like a curtain. It sat across the road, solid and absolute. And when my headlights hit it, the light did not penetrate. It did not reflect. The beams just ended, like shining a flashlight into a hole with no bottom. Every part of me refused to drive into it. Not a decision, a refusal. My body would not do it. My foot would not press the gas. I sat there, at the edge of the darkness, and I knew with a certainty that I have never felt about anything else in my life, that whatever was on the other side of that wall was not a place I could go and come back from. I turned around, tried the North Road. The darkness was there too. Tried the West Road where the county blacktop runs toward the river bridge. Same thing. Harlow was surrounded. The darkness had closed around the town on every side, and the only opening was to the east, where everyone was walking. I looked at Craig. His eyes were black. His pupils had gone all the way, swallowed the color completely. His hands had dropped from the dashboard to his lap. His breathing was slow and even, and he was not blinking. He was looking east through the windshield with that same expression I had seen on all the others. Not fear, not pain. Something I could not name. I said his name. He did not answer. He opened the passenger door and got out of the truck and walked east without looking back. Steady, unhurried steps. I watched him in the mirror until he turned a corner and was gone. I was alone. I drove back to the center of town and parked in front of the fire station. The streets were empty now. Not because people had gone inside, because they had all gone east. Every person in Harlow, as far as I could tell, had walked toward the darkness. When I looked down the long straight line of Main Street to the east, I could see them. Silhouettes, hundreds of them, standing at the edge where the houses ended and the fields began and the darkness waited. They were lined up shoulder to shoulder in a long curved row, like the front edge of a congregation, and they were still. The sirens were still sounding, but what was coming out of them was not something I want to describe. It was not a siren. It was not a voice. It was something that should not come out of a machine, and it was coming from everywhere, not just the poles, the walls of the buildings, the pavement under my tires, the air itself. The whole town was vibrating with it. I turned on the truck radio looking for anything human. Every station was the same. That low, wet sound rolling through every frequency, filling the static, replacing the silence between channels. There was nowhere on the dial that did not have it. I sat in my truck with the doors locked and the engine running, and I waited. I did not have a plan. I did not have options. I am a man who fixes things, and there was nothing here to fix. The only thing I could do was not go east. So I stayed. I leaned my seat back and I stared at the ceiling of the cab, and I focused on the sound of my engine and the feel of the steering wheel under my fingers. And I did not listen to the sirens, and I did not look east, and I waited for morning. The darkness did not come into the town. It stayed at the edges. I do not know why. I do not know if it could not or if it chose not to. It just held its position like a fence line, close enough to touch if you walk to the end of any street, but no closer. The people of Harlow stood at its edge for hours. I would glance in my mirrors and see them still there, that long silent row of figures at the border between the town and whatever was beyond it. Around 4:30 in the morning, the sirens stopped. The silence that followed was physical. It landed on the town like something heavy. My ears rang. The world sounded hollow and muffled the way it does when you have been standing too close to machinery. I sat in that silence for a long time. I was afraid to open the door, afraid that any movement would restart it. Dawn came slowly. The sky turned grey in the east, then pale blue, then gold. The darkness pulled back, It did not vanish. It receded the way night does, gradually, like it had never been anything other than the absence of light. By the time the sun cleared the tree line, the fields looked normal. Corn stubble and bare dirt and a tree line along the creek half a mile out. The sky was clear. A few birds were singing. The air smelled like dew and nothing else. I got out of my truck and walked east. The streets were empty. The yards were empty. The long row of silhouettes that had stood at the edge of town all night was gone. I walked all the way to the last house on the east side, a little yellow ranch with a chain-link fence, and I looked out across the fields. Nothing, just farmland and sky. But in the dew on the lawns and the soft dirt along the road shoulders, I could see footprints. Hundreds of sets of footprints, all facing east, all leading out of town toward the fields. None coming back. I walked through every street in Harlow. I checked houses, doors standing open, lights still on, televisions playing to empty rooms, a pot of water boiling dry on a stove in one house, a bathtub running upstairs in another, cars in driveways with keys still in the ignition, coffee mugs on kitchen tables, shoes by front doors, every sign of a life interrupted and not returned to. 1,600 people, gone. Every single one, except me. I drove south. The road was clear. No darkness, no wall, no barrier. Just county blacktop running between soybean fields under a blue sky. I drove until I hit the next town over, Ridgemont, and I walked into the sheriff's substation and told the deputy at the desk that something had happened in Harlow. They searched for weeks. State police, county sheriff, National Guard, volunteers from 6 surrounding counties. They went through every building in Harlow. They searched the fields, the creek bottoms, the woods on both ridges. They brought in dogs. They brought in helicopters. They dragged a 2-mile stretch of the Little Saline River east of town. They found nothing, not a single person, not a single body, no clothing, no personal items, no trail through the fields beyond those first footprints in the dew, which ended about 200 yards east of town, like everyone had simply stopped leaving tracks and kept walking into nothing. The official report called it a mass displacement event linked to a possible gas leak from an abandoned well site east of town. They said naturally occurring hydrogen sulfide could have caused confusion, disorientation, and coordinated movement toward the source of the leak. They said the victims likely entered the creek system and were carried downstream by overnight water flow. That explanation requires you to believe that over 1,500 people, including infants being carried by their mothers and elderly residents who could barely walk to their mailboxes, all marched in the same direction on the same night, entered a creek that was running about 6 inches deep that time of year, and were carried away so completely that not one shoe, not one piece of fabric, not one human remain was ever recovered anywhere downstream. I do not believe that. I do not think whoever wrote the report believes it either. I do not live in Harlow anymore. Nobody does. The town is still there. The buildings are still standing. The sirens are still on their poles. But nobody has moved back. The state put a chain across the main road and posted no trespassing signs, and that was the end of it. I have driven past the turnoff a few times. I have never gone back in. The thing that stays with me is not the darkness, though I still cannot close my eyes in a fully dark room. It is not the sound, though I have not been able to listen to a tornado siren test since that night without my hands starting to shake. The thing that stays with me is their faces. All those people standing in the street facing east and the expressions they wore. It was not fear. It was not pain. It was not the blank look of someone in a trance. If I had to put a word to it, and I have spent a long time trying, the closest I can come is recognition. Like they were seeing something they had always known was there. Like the sirens were not a warning at all, but an invitation, and every person in Harlow except me accepted it. I do not know why I did not walk east. I do not know what was different about me. I do not know if that makes me lucky or if it makes me the one who missed something everyone else understood. Some nights I think I was saved. Other nights I think I was left behind. And those are the worst nights. Because being left behind means whatever called them did not want me. And I cannot stop wondering why. I still hear the sirens sometimes. Not outside, not in dreams. Somewhere deeper than that. Somewhere behind my thoughts, in that thin, quiet space between being awake and falling asleep. A low sound, rising and falling, patient, familiar, almost warm. And every time I hear it, the sound is a little clearer. And every time it sounds a little more like my name. I have not followed it yet.